Indonesia. Good evening, Professor Arkun.
Good evening. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum jami'an.
I'm very happy, and I'm sure that the viewers are very happy to have you with us this evening.
Yes, I am always happy to come to this country. It's my 6th visit.
And I hope you enjoy this visit, this present visit of yours.
Yes, because I learn a lot in this country as a person interested in the history of Islamic thought and, of course, interested in contemporary Islamic thought.
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you very much.
Yes, I discover a lot of things, new approaches, attitudes, open mind.
Yes.
To follow the new trends in social sciences to be applied to the study of Islam in general.
And I'm sure that we are Indonesians also benefit much from your presence in our country.
I hope so. I hope so.
Thank you very much, Professor Arkun. The salient features of your thinking, especially on your criticism on the development of Islamic thought in general, of its lack of rigorous methodology, so to speak.
Yes. Actually, yes. As an Algerian born in Algeria, I have been very much influenced by the history of Algeria since the war for the independence in the 50s. Algeria has been independent in 1962. And as a scholar, historian of Islamic thought, I have always endeavored to create a new approach of Islamic studies under the title Applied Islamology, which means that the study of Islam, instead of relying only on the books which are written in the past or written today, should start from the situations of Muslims today in all Muslim societies after they have recovered their political independence, because all of them, they have been colonized. The independence occurred in the 50s and the 60s. And we know all that new problems have been raised in all these societies, and Muslims try to answer to these problems by reading the Quran and returning to Islamic tradition, which is of course good. But the trouble is that we do not know enough Islamic thought itself. The history of Islamic thought is not yet taught properly according to the rules of the way to write history of the past. Historians have changed a lot the methodologies of how to write history of the past. For example, all the sources that we have to write the period of the emergence of the Quran and the period of the Prophet himself, the sources have been written much later. So these sources are written in the new context of Umayyad and Abbasid period, in the context of ideological struggle about the Caliphate, which means that all these sources are more dependent on the ideological struggles and also the struggles between schools of law and schools of theology, than trained to look and try to understand what has happened actually in the time of the Prophet. So this raises a lot of problems to understand. Similarly, the way we try to ask to Islam to give an answer to our problems of today is also very dangerous, because our problems, our struggles are ideological. We struggle for power. We do not struggle so much for the quest for meaning. And when we read the Quran, we must absolutely give a priority for the quest for meaning, not the struggle for power, to get to power. This is a major thing to understand together. So I am struggling also with my colleagues, European colleagues, those who are writing on Islam and who are called Orientalists, because they do not start from the problems of today to link between the necessity for us to understand these problems, how it is emerging and expanding today in our societies, and the way to use the ancient sources to see how far it is relevant to look for answers in the hadith, in the Quran, or even in what we call the Sharia. Sharia itself has a history with many schools. So you see there are a lot of problems which are not yet raised because we do not yet teach Islamic thought properly in our new universities. I say new because we created it, all of us, since the independence. It has at most 50 years old. So these are major problems.
Am I right if I say that what you are talking about now is how to apply modern methodologies, such as phenomenology as well as deconstruction on Islamic thought?
Yes, but I would like to name the disciplines of itself, because linguistics is a very strong discipline, especially since the last 50 years. Many schools of linguistics have emerged, and there are a lot of theoretical discussions about the relationship between language and thought. How languages have an influence through their history as languages on thought, on the way we think, on the way we explain and understand, and how new questions raised in our thoughts, in our thinking, influence the language that we have to use. For example, when I write in Arabic, I have many problems because in Arabic language, like I would say in Indonesian here, we do not have the technical vocabulary which has been developed by linguistics.
Yes.
The technical vocabulary developed by sociology and anthropology. And these sciences are absolutely essential today to read the Quran. Like Fakhruddin Razi, when he wrote his massive commentary of the Quran, he used all the sciences available in his time to read the Quran. So we have to do the same, but the sciences today have changed. When we compare it to the history, for example, in the time of Fakhruddin Razi, it's not the same.
Yeah.
So all these problems are not properly taught in departments of Islamic studies, and I would say even that the departments of Islamic studies in our universities are the weakest departments, unfortunately.
Yeah. So what you are talking is not how to criticize the divine Islamic teaching as such, but how the Muslims interpret.
Yes, I would like to say that the word critic is a positive word. It's not a negative word.
Yes.
Because many people understand critic as negative.
Yes.
I'm not approaching Islam in a negative way. On the contrary, I am approaching it with a critic, and the critic is to enhance the understanding of Islam.
So instead of...
It's not to limit it or to dismiss it. Never.
Yeah.
Many people are misunderstanding the word. I wrote a book with the title Critic of Islamic Reason. This is, for example, in Arabic, Naqd al-Aqd al-Islami. It sounds like a blasphemy. And it is critic, like in the classical time, people were reading critic of poetry, critic of books which are written either in poetic form or in prose form.
Or books
so
written
the
by...
naqd, literary criticism, naqd, is also positive.
Yes.
I apply it now to the religious texts.
Yeah. So that's why I would like to emphasize that your criticism is motivated more to empower the Muslims to interpret the Islamic teachings correctly rather than to create innovation.
And also there is another function which I mentioned. Ideological struggle is overwhelmingly dominant in our societies. Look what is happening.
Yes.
We have even civil wars about power. It is terrible. And we are including Islam in these struggles, in these civil wars. This is a big responsibility. So the problem of critique here is to clarify, to make a clear distinction between the intellectual and spiritual interpretation of Islam. This is what a religion is about.
Could you give us more examples about the role of ideology in deviating the interpretation?
The role of ideology, for example, where when we say that we have to apply the Sharia as we got it from the medieval ages, and to apply it today to the societies. Those people in classical time who have elaborated the books of Sharia, Abu Hanifa, Malik ibn Anas, Shafi'i, Ibn Hanbal, Ja'far Sadiq, and many others, what they did? They have practiced what we call ijtihad.
Yes.
And ijtihad is an intellectual endeavor. If you read all the books on usul al-fiqh, the books which develop a methodology to elaborate the law of Sharia, istinbatul ahkam,
Yes.
which is the technical expression, they start always with an introduction on linguistics.
Yeah.
They never start just by saying this verse means this and this verse, which means that they had a methodology. They were taking care about using scientific disciplines which are required from each Imam Mujtahid. So today we have to do the same.
Yes.
We have to reactivate this discipline.
Yeah.
And this discipline is the weakest today.
Yeah. We will continue after this, Professor Arkun. Demikianlah para persoalan sekalian, perbincangan kita sudah mulai phenomenology as well as the method of deconstruction. But I'm sure that the viewers would like to know what will be the role of Islamic sciences in your methodology, such as ilm al-hadith, ilm al-tafsir, and...
Yes, these sciences, of course, are basic, because they are called usul.
Yes.
Usul al-din and usul al-fiqh. They are the fundamentals, the fundamental references for building a theology, ilm al-kalam, which is called also usul al-din, and for building the Sharia. So the importance of this text is absolutely out of question. That's why I focus on these primary texts, but I focus on it with the methodologies, as we explained, of linguistics. Linguistics today is the main discipline that we have to use to read these texts according to the modern requirements. But also there is another discipline. Actually, there are two disciplines. The other one is history, but history today is a multidisciplinary discipline, if I may say, because it uses itself linguistics, it uses sociology, historical sociology, and it uses anthropology. Because in the text like the Quran, like the Bible, and like all big religious texts, we find narratives. What the Quran calls qasas. Inna naqussu alayka ahsan al-qasas. And the qasas, in the anthropological meaning, means the mythical narratives. That's why a large part of the Quranic discourse has, as we say, a mythical structure. And the Quran makes a difference between qissa, qasas, and ustura. Ustura is the fable taken by imagination, which has no grassroots in the truth, the ilm that the Quran wants to establish. The Quran establishes the roots in these narratives, which are called qasas. So the Quran itself has a vocabulary very precise. We have legend and we have mythical narrative. And the Quran, ustura, legend, and mythical narrative, which is the narrative in which we grasp the roots in the history of salvation, as it is proposed by all the prophets before Muhammad and continued in the Quran with the revelation in the Quran. So you see how important it is to use the material and the new concepts which are proposed by anthropology, because anthropology looks to all traditions. It looks in the same way to books of Buddhism, to books of Hinduism, but it looks also to the books of philosophers. When we read Plato, for example, we have in Plato also narratives, parables, to present the meaning. This we are not used yet. When you say mythical narratives in the Quran, through my experience, many people say, oh, this is a blasphemy, again. Because they think mythical in the sense of legend. They do not receive it in this very positive sense, which we find with Plato as a philosopher, and we find with the religious texts, not only the Quran. It's a long literary tradition in Semitic culture. I say Semitic culture because the Bible is Hebrew. The teachings of Jesus, son of Mary, as Isa ibn Maryam, as the Quran calls him, is an Aramean language, which is a Semitic language. And Arabic is a Semitic language. So we are in the cultural linguistic sphere of Semitic history of meaning, if I may put it. So you enlarge the horizon. Like the Quran itself has enlarged the horizon of history of salvation, because he teaches us through the narratives, the history of Moses, the history of Adam, the history of Noah, the story of Dawood, all these ancient narratives, which the Quran recapitulates to say that history of salvation is a long history.
The problem is people usually misperceive myths as something which doesn't have any basis on reality, in reality.
This is because, as I said, in our universities we are not teaching anthropology. You see how it is absolutely necessary to introduce these disciplines to enhance our understanding of Islam. When I say to modernize Islamic thought, it means this, that people are not misled when they read in English, for example, or in French, as I wrote it, the Quran is a discourse which is based on mythical narratives. I'm just expressing what the Quran says. I'm not imposing on the Quran a vocabulary which I borrowed from the West. This is also a big misunderstanding. People think always that I'm taking from the West a vocabulary which is foreign to the Quran. It is not foreign. I'm telling exactly. نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ أَحْسَنَ الْقَصَصِ. That's what I'm telling. But I'm expressing it in a larger vision and enhancing Islamic thought like it has been enhanced by Ibn Rushd, by Mu'tazili thinkers, by Ash'ari thinkers in the classical time, because they used in the same way the vocabulary which they borrowed from philosophy, and philosophy played a major role as well as theology. And this, in our contemporary Islam, we misunderstand, because we have cut our relation to philosophy as well, and this is more important, to theology. My contention is that today we do not have a theology on the level of intellectual endeavor which has been developed in the medieval ages. This is a shame. Isn't it a shame for us to be in 20th century and to be intellectually as Muslims with our tradition under the level which has been reached, for example, by Ibn Rushd.
But I suppose that it doesn't mean that with this methodology one would have to throw all the long and rich history of Islamic thought in the past.
I'm taking back all this. I do not, never, you can see in all my book, I am using all these texts. And I am using what I call, I want to restore what I call the exhaustive Islamic tradition, not the fragmented Islamic tradition, because it has been also fragmented. Do you know that Imami Shia in Iran, for example, Ithna Ashariya, they had a struggle with the Sunni Muslims. since the very beginning of Islam, about Ali and the concept of Imam and concept of the Caliphate. This is a theological struggle. And Shia Muslims have developed their own corpus of hadith, with Kulayni, with Tosi, with Ibn Babwi, and they never read the corpus of hadith, which is the corpus chosen by Sunni Muslims. This is a big issue. So historians have to look to both, to see what has happened. How it came like this, parallel transmission of two ways of an Islamic tradition. Nobody would dare to say that Shi'is are not Muslims. Nobody, never I would say this. Because I am a Sunni Muslim, never I would say this. Because I am taught by these texts, these authors who have produced major pieces of theology. And also the richness of this production is that they maintained an intellectual debate on a high level when Shia and Sunni discuss.
Thank you very much, Professor Arkun. Demikianlah para pirsawan sekalian. Where is the place of Tassawuf, Sufism, in all these?
Yes, very important place. But again, Sufism has a history, and we have forgotten the richest aspect of what we call Sufism. Sufism in the first 4 centuries of the Hijrah, which means the 10th, between the 7th and 10th century of Christ, has developed a spiritual experience of the absolute of God, the transcendence of God, through the reading and the meditation, the personal meditation of the Quranic discourse, or the Word of God. Here, we should say more than Quranic discourse. You see the difference between approaching linguistics with linguistics and approaching through spirituality. And Sufis have developed 3 dimensions in this spiritual experience, which is stemming from the Word of God in the Quran. Because in the Quran, they were reading and searching for the presence of God, to interiorize it. And they did it through spiritual meditation, personal spiritual meditation, an expression of this meditation with a poetic form in the language, to express the beauty, the aesthetic dimension of the spiritual experience. So this is the second dimension. And they have a third dimension, the intellectual criticism, self-criticism of their way to receive the Word of God, to interiorize it and to interpret it. Because you have to interpret it so that you appropriate it for yourself. So we have 3 forces, psychic forces, which are in function in the same time, which is the dynamic of the whole human mind, mobilized. Memory, imagination, intelligence, reason, all the faculties of mind are mobilized. And they have written wonderful books like Hallaj. He wrote poetry about it. Like Muhasibi, he wrote wonderful books about this experience applied to what he calls Fahm al-Quran. The intelligence,
the understanding of the Quran.
The intelligence, more than just understanding, intelligence to appropriate it spiritually and intellectually. So this is a very rich experience. But this experience in the classical time will degenerate when the multicultural, approach of the Quran will disappear after 13th century. Then Sufis will become brotherhoods, turuq,
Yes.
And turuq are more oriented to groups of people around the sheikh. And the sheikh will play, of course, a spiritual role. He will teach this experience. But there will be fragmentations, because each sheikh will develop his own tariqah, his own approach and his own experience with his disciples around him. And these disciples will constitute a social group which will obey to the sheikh, not to the rest of the sheikhs. So there is a fragmenting, a social fragmenting, and also the fragmentation of the experience itself. And they came to play also major political roles. For example, in Senegal today we have two, Murid and Tijaniya, which are two turuq, two ways of expressing this experience, but they play a major political role in the same time.
So can we say that?
So there is this evolution that we have not to confuse, so that we can make a distinction between the enriching experience of each individual. And I mentioned that each individual is free to develop this experience. One of the most important examples, which is unfortunately forgotten and ignored, is Abu Hayyan al-Tawhidi in 10th century. I wish I can have time to say a lot about this author, who has been eliminated already in the ancient tradition, because the official fuqaha have been all against this trend, because this trend tries to be autonomous from politics, and the fuqaha are controlling the orthodoxy, and the orthodoxy of fuqaha is not the same as the orthodoxy developed by Sufis. So you see, there are many stakes in this struggle, and many have been condemned. Abu Hayyan Tawhidi has written a book, الحج العقلي لا الحج العقلي إذا ضاق الفضاء إلى الحج الشرعي. عقلي, شرعي. And he names it عقلي, not روحي, because he was a great intellectual, a great critical intellectual. I learned criticism from him in his time, because he was criticizing philosophers, criticizing politicians, criticizing theologians from his embracing view of all the disciplines, and all the disciplines itself are taken, understood, explained through his books with his own experience of the divine, Al-Isharat al-Ilahiyya, one of his books, and the other. And he has been condemned especially for this book, unfortunately, which is lost because it has been destroyed. He has been accused of being a zindiq, you know. So many people like this are called a zindiq. And even me, some call me a zindiq because, of course, I'm trying to resurrect wonderful experiences. I'm not defending this against this, not at all. A historian gives a voice to all voices which have been silenced in history arbitrarily.
We'll talk more on this, Professor Arkun, after this.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Can we say that this shift from Tassawuf to Tariqah is something like a shift from a more existential experience to a more political manifestations of Sufism?
In the ancient societies, traditional societies, it's difficult to make this distinction between political and religion, because this distinction is modern. We are concerned with it today. What we can say is that the central political government, as it existed with the Caliphate, and as it existed with the Sultanate, with Turks, after 16th century, disappeared. And when it disappeared, societies needed to have, nevertheless, some leader to lead them. And these leaders have been religious-minded people. And they have been these shuyukh who took over in the absence of the centralized state in the Muslim societies. This is the explanation of the growing number of the turuq and the role of turuq, which is cultural role, religious role, and of course social and political role altogether. But on a smaller scale than the scale of the empire, when the caliphate and the sultanate had empires and to govern empires. And these shuyukh existed always, but they had less importance in the time of the caliphate than they had afterwards.
Yeah. By distinguishing Tassawuf from Tariqah by using this existential approach to Tassawuf, actually I would like to ask you whether your literary criticism would apply more to this political manifestation of Sufism rather than to Sufism itself?
No, it applies for both, because it shows precisely the difference between a personal experience of the divine, because the Sufism is a very personal experience, which is communicated through initiation, and Sufis discuss about the possibility for a sheikh to communicate all his experience to the disciples. They discuss about it, because it's not given. It's not easy. Because everyone, when he engages himself in this discovery, it is a discovery of the divine for each person. And in some sense, this personal discovery cannot be communicated. When you start to communicate it, it becomes a school. And it becomes a tariqah, because you have people who are going to listen. They will take from what you say, not really your personal experience of the divine, but the wording that you give to this experience, which will be repeated on a political scale, on a social scale, and on the way of taqlid, not on the way of ijtihad.
Yeah.
This is the main differentiation. You see, and this is important to study, because today we confuse again between these two aspects of personal experience of the divine, as we find it also in Christianity. We find it in Buddhism, we find it in Judaism. It's not only for Muslims. And it generates, it degenerates for the same reasons. Because a sheikh, when he starts to have disciples, it becomes a social group. And this social group will necessarily have some ambitions to enlarge his power in the society. So you cannot control this shift from the spiritual experience, religious spiritual experience, to the political needs of the societies. And this has to be analyzed. I'm saying this out of the linguistic analysis of the text, when you compare the text of the turuqs and the text of the shuyukh in classical time, out also of the sociological analysis of the turuq as social groups, and the persons, the individual persons who did what they did before the turuq existed like this. Also sociology will help, you see? And this illustrates what I told in the beginning about the multidisciplinary approach of all aspects of Islamic thought, to give them all the dimensions which we need to know today, but to not simplify these things which are so rich, and to instruct people today about the richness of these experiences, and not to reduce it, as we say today, Islamic fundamentalism, political Islam, etc. And even the scholarship developed in the West is focusing only on this, forgetting all these dimensions. That's why I try to re-establish a long-term perspective on the study of Islam. Because political scientists are looking to Islam as it is expressed in the short-term perspectives. For example, since the emergence of Khomeini, they don't look back. What happens in Islam, in Islamic thought, in Muslim societies. And this I wish that the listeners grasp all these ideas.
So finally, how do you propose, or what will be your proposal to the Society of Islam, the Islamic Society?
Yes, in my first lecture here, this time for this visit to Indonesia, I insisted very much on the importance of looking critically to the system of education, already in elementary schools and secondary schools, to teach history of Islamic thought in this open way, so that people can know what a historical reasoning means, to differentiate a historical reasoning and presentation of Sufism and Turk like I did now, and the dogmatic presentation, saying that it has one shape, it has one way, and that's it, and this is the authentic Islam. Islam is so diverse, so rich, and Islam is interesting and great as much as we look at this diversity. So there is a new teaching to be introduced in the schools. And as I emphasized, the disciplines, the modern disciplines, which are absolutely essential to Islam, to study Islamic thought, is linguistics, because we have to read texts, is history, but with its multidisciplinary approach. It is anthropology, because anthropology here in Indonesia is a key for Indonesian society. Why? You have many languages, you have many cultures, you have many ethnic groups, and this is a richness. And this richness cannot be explicited and explained to people so that each group can find himself concerned without anthropology.
Thank you very much, Professor Arkun. Professor Arkun, how would you respond if someone say that with this kind of approach, you will create something like a distance between a Muslim and his religion by making him not living the religion, but more analyzing the religion?
No, no, no. You live religion with more possibilities to enrich your experience, spiritual experience, as I explained for Sufi people. They did that. And you can control it by reading the books of Ibn Arabi, reading the books of Muhasibi, of Bistami, of Rabi al-Adawiyya, of all these major figures of Sufis, who are the teachers, not of the Sufism as we understand it today, which is for me a mutilation of the richness of those people, but to understand what is religion is about, the essence of religion. Because the Sufi people are making a distinction by their witnessing, way of witnessing what a spiritual experience is, the difference between the spiritual sphere and experience and the dunya sphere of affairs, which are submitted to the competitions of human beings or to social actors, as the sociologists call them, because we are actors in the society, playing roles like in theater. This is a metaphor to explain that we are all playing a theater, more or less, when we are engaged in social debates or functions. When you are engaged in a Sufi experience, you are meditating in places. For example, Sufi people in Christianity, they have always built in places extremely poetic. Just when you are there, you are elevated, just by the what you see in the earth, the beauty of the place, you are inspired and elevated. And this beauty, they integrate it in their experience, and they give it to the other, not through a teaching or analysis, but through writing, spontaneously as a poet. As spontaneously as a poet, writing this experience. So, you read what they wrote, it's up to you to grasp or not to grasp. In the tariqah, it's not up to you.
Yeah.
So you see the differences.
Yeah.
They are major. And what I'm saying is, I think, very enriching because it expresses exactly what has been done. It's not something that I am imposing or creating arbitrary. It's history.
Yeah. So this methodology is like a tool for us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Rather than...
And as I said, you cannot separate the intellectual endeavor, ijtihad.
Yeah.
Intellectual ijtihad is intellectual exercise, and the spiritual experience. You both link between them. And again, read الإشارة الإلهية of Tawhidi and read المقابسات and إمتاع المؤانسة. You can explain, I have no time to explain it, these titles in Arabic, and they are available in the libraries, and you will see. So I am relying on examples, very rich examples, that we have to resurrect in the modern climate of tolerance and democracy. Not in the climate of fanaticism, in the climate of arrogance, which comes from ideology. Ideology tells me, I know, you don't know. And you have to obey to me because I know better than you. This is not...
Thank you very, very much, Professor Arkun.
Thank you.
It has been a great and very enlightening discussion.
I hope.
We hope that we will have a second opportunity to have an interview with you. Again,
Yes.
thank you very much, Professor Arkun.